Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava, page 51b, at the top of the page, with the words Lema ha-Rabbi, ha-Rebbe, v'ha-Rabbanan. Shall we say that this Braita, which teaches that they're all liable, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? From now on, we'll just call him Rabbi, who holds both liable for digging, and this Braita, which holds the latter liable in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, who hold only the last one as liable. Whereas Vid said, both this Braita and that Braita are in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. The way the first Braita accords with their opinion is that the rabbis say that the last one was liable only where the first one did not make the pit of sufficient measurement to cause death, but dug less than 10 handbreadths. But where the first one made a pit of sufficient measurement to cause death, such as in this case where the first one dug 10 handbreadths himself and was subsequently deepened further by others, even the rabbis concede that they are all liable. The Gemara asks, but in the second Braita, where he plastered and cemented it, the first made a pit of sufficient measurement to cause death. And nevertheless, the Braita teaches that the last person is liable. They said in response, there it is, referring to a case where the pit did not have fumes capable of leading to death, since it was very wide. And then the other came, and by narrowing it with plaster and cementing it, he added to it the characteristic of having fumes capable of leading to death. There are those who say that this is what Razvid said. Both this Braita and that Braita are in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi. This first Braita, which teaches they're all liable, fits well with his opinion. The second Braita, which teaches the last one alone is liable, is referring to a case where the pit did not have sufficient fumes in it that were capable of leading to either death or damage, and then another person came and by narrowing it with plaster and cementing it, he added to it the characteristic of having fumes capable of leading to both death and damage. Elaborating on this subject, Rava says, with regard to one who placed a stone at the opening of a pit less than 10 handbreadths deep, and brings the pit into a depth of 10 handbreadths by raising the ground next to the opening of the pit, we have arrived at the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and the rabbis, concerning whether only the second or both are responsible for damage caused. The Gemara asks, isn't this obvious? This is precisely the case they are disputing. So what does Rava's statement add to this? The Gemara answers, lest you say that there is a distinction between a person deepening a pit at the bottom, in which case it is his lethal fumes that he caused that kill the animal. But if he added to the pit at the top, where it is not his lethal fumes that killed the animal, say that he would not be liable. Rava's statement teaches us that the last one is liable, and this case is subject to dispute between Rabbi and the rabbis as to whether only the last one or both are liable. Rava raises the following dilemma. If someone dug another handbreadth in a pit that was 9 handbreadths deep, so that it reached a depth of 10 handbreadths, and subsequently closed up that handbreadth inside the pit, or if he removed his stones that he had placed at the opening of the pit so that the depth of the pit was reduced to less than 10 handbreadths, what is the halacha? Do we say that what he did to increase the depth of the pit to 10 handbreadths, he has removed and restored the initial situation that existed before he dug the extra handbreadth, causing responsibility for damage to revert solely to the original digger? Or perhaps by closing it up, he removed the action of the first digger, since he has removed the ability of the pit to cause death. If so, it moves entirely into his possession and now assumes full responsibility for the pit of 9 handbreadths. The Gemara concludes, the question shall stand unresolved. Teku. And this would probably be the 126th Teku in Shas. Yeah, I think so. Last one was 125, yeah. This is the 125th Teku in Shas. Very nice. Amar Rabba bar Chana. Rabba bar Chana says that Shmuel bar Marta says, with regard to a pit that is 8 handbreadths deep, and 2 handbreadths of it contain water, one is liable for it. What is the reason? Each handbreadth of water is like 2 handbreadths of dry space. Therefore, the pit is effectively 10 handbreadths in depth and contains sufficient quantity of lethal fumes to render its owner liable. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If a pit is 9 handbreadths deep, and from that measurement 1 handbreadth contains water, what is the halacha? Is this case equivalent to the previous case? Do we say that since there is not a large quantity of water as in the first case, stated by Rabba bar Chana, the pit does not have a sufficient quantity of lethal fumes to render the digger liable? Or perhaps it can be argued that since the pit is deeper than the one of the previous case, it does have lethal fumes despite containing less water. Similarly, the following question can be raised. What is the halacha of if a pit is 7 handbreadths deep and 3 of the handbreadths contain water? Do we say that since there is a much larger quantity of water in this case, is equivalent to a pit of 10 handbreadths and therefore has lethal fumes? Or perhaps, since it is not as deep, it does not have a sufficient quantity of lethal fumes to render the digger liable? The Gemara concludes, the question shall stand unresolved. Teku. 2 tekus. This must be Teku 127. Wow. Did Rabbi Pessin get that one? I don't know. Rabbi Shezvi asked the following question of Rabbah. If one widened the opening of a pit that was already 10 handbreadths deep, what is the halacha? Rabbah said to him, by doing so, he has actually reduced the lethal fumes and has not worsened the situation. Therefore, he should not be liable. Rav Shezvi said to him, on the contrary, by widening the opening of the pit, he has brought the potential for damage closer to the animal that might fall inside. Rather, Rav Ashi said concerning this question, let us see, if the animal died because of the lethal fumes, the one who widened the pit should be exempt, since he reduced the lethal fumes. But if the animal died because of the impact, he should be liable since he has brought the potential for damage closer to it. There are those who say that Ravashi said, let us see, if the animal fell on that side that he widened, then his action has brought the potential for damage closer. And so he should be liable. But if the animal fell on the other side, he should bear no responsibility since he reduced the lethal fumes. It was stated with regard to a pit, whose depth is equal to its width. Rabbah and Rav Yosef both say a ruling in the name of Rabbah, Bar Chana, who says in the name of Rabbi Mani, but each presented differently. One of them says a pit always contains a quantity of lethal fumes sufficient for liability. What about the pit that Yosef was in? Did that contain lethal fumes? Unless its width is greater than its depth. Therefore, when they're equal, the digger is liable. And one says a pit never contains a quantity of lethal fumes sufficient for liability unless its depth is greater than its width. Consequently, when they are equal, the digger is exempt. The Mishnah teaches that if the first partner passed by the pit and did not cover it, and then the second also passed by and did not cover it, the second is liable. The Gemara asks, and from what point is the first exempt from responsibility of the pit? Rabbah and Rav Yosef both say a ruling in the name of Rabbah Bar Chana, who says in the name of Rabbi Mani, but each one presents it differently. One says from the time he leaves the other partner using it, and one says the first is absolved of responsibility only when he conveys to him his bucket, with which he will draw water from the pit. How are we doing on time? Getting close. The Gemara notes this dispute is like a dispute between Tanaim, as is taught in the Braita with regard to one who draws water from a cistern, and his friend comes and says to him, leave me, and I will draw water. Once the person leaves the second person, while the second is using the cistern, the first is now exempt if he did not cover it. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says the first person is not absolved of responsibility until the time when he conveys his bucket to the second person. The Gemara clarifies the dispute. With regard to what principle do they disagree? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov maintains that there is a legal concept of designation. According to this principle, the situation in which certain aspects were not initially clearly defined can become clarified retroactively after a certain action or event occurs. The halacha treats all the aspects of being clearly defined and identifiable from the outset. Okay. One more paragraph and then we'll stop. In this case, the water is considered divided between the partners even before they draw it. When they do draw it, it is treated as if this one were filling from his part, the location of which has now been determined retroactively, and this one were filling from his part. Therefore, as long as the first partner has not conveyed his bucket to the second, he, as an owner of a defined part of the water, has not absolved himself of responsibility from the cistern. And by contrast, the rabbis maintain that there is no designation, and they both have the right to draw water from the cistern. Therefore, as soon as the second partner is left alone to draw water, he is responsible for the cistern and all the water it contains, even without conveying the bucket.